Welcome back, everyone. We're very excited to now move on to a conversation around the future of data science in the public sector. And we have two experts to help us understand what's coming next. So first off, we have DJ Patil, who is the former US Chief Data Scientist, and he's also a board member at Devoted Health. And you just heard from our CEO, Dan Wagner. And so with that, I will turn it over to both DJ and Dan.
Oh my goodness. Well, DJ, thank you so much for coming to this. DJ and I have been friends for many years, and truly is an inspiration, mentor, et cetera, for me, and Civis's involvement in getting involved in government data. So DJ, thank you so much for coming. Any words before we begin on your intro?
I mean, just glad to be here. Sorry we can't be together in person, but I think also I know that for those that are out there, especially those that are in our state agencies and our different parts of government, just thanks. Honestly, thank you for all you all are doing. I know it's an extraordinarily trying time. Many of you are very, very tired, and just know you have my gratitude to start.
Yeah, and I echo that. On our customer side, we see that a lot of you folks are overextended, but in the world of COVID, government services, you're really doing the work that we need as a country. So thank you again from our side as well. So DJ, thank you again for being here. Just to prep, I want to start a little bit of your history, because when you were younger, there wasn't this data science path. Data science didn't exist. There weren't data professionals in government. And you had a non-traditional path where it wasn't data, the job, et cetera. And I want to understand just briefly, if that can be done, how did you get into the world of data science? How did the DJ story evolve from the beginning? And how did you get from beginning of university, PhD program, all towards largely helping to invent this field and then putting a lot of the standards in place from a private sector employee to the government category? Tell us about you.
Yeah, I mean, the quick version is, and something I think is important to highlight, especially given a bunch of the legislative things that are happening right now for the Biden-Harris administration, is I didn't get it. I didn't go to the traditional path of colleges. I started in community college, and this is why community college is so important to me. I went to a phenomenal community college that really they kicked my ass. They kicked my ass in a way that helped me understand what it takes to actually really build things, do things. And one of those things that it helped me see was both a love for writing, math, and so much more. And from that, I really realized I thought that, hey, math is this phenomenal thing that gives you license to explore the universe, creativity, all these things, but also communicate. And that arc that took me from community college to getting my doctorate in nonlinear dynamics and chaos theory at the University of Maryland really just helped me open my eyes to how we can start to use data in novel ways. And one of the ways I did it during my doctorate work and research work after was in weather forecasting. And the idea that you could start downloading data just from the web and find these insights that could transform the way we look at weather, it struck me as like this awe-inspiring, powerful moment of democratizing data at that time. And from that, after 9/11, I had the opportunity to first go into public service in the Defense Threat Reduction Agency under the Department of Defense. And we got to see how data could actually be used in novel ways to address threats against the US. This was those ideas of like find signal in the noise. And then following those activities and really seeing that we could actually make this work, coming out to here back to Silicon Valley where I grew up, we realized that maybe you could build things with data. Maybe you could do a lot more. And that idea wasn't obvious. I talked to a lot of the big companies that you all know about, the Googles, the Yahoos, all of those back in the day. And everyone kind of thought, maybe, yeah, we know there's this idea of data, but we didn't think that it was real promise. But finally, after we started to show that you could do this in companies, one of the things that happened particularly was at LinkedIn, where we said we bet a lot of the company's future on the idea that you could not just think of data in this way that you just build a chart or a graph, but you can use data to transform the value proposition for the end user. so that people who are using the product actually get the disproportionate value, not just building it for advertising or other things. And that's when we realized that data actually needs to be something more holistic. There needs to be a different type of categorization for people like us. We didn't slot into this. And literally the way we came up with the title data scientist, Monica Ragati had this idea of saying, well, what do we call, whoops, sorry, that's a dog. Hey, shh. Because like when we have, hey, this is our COVID life. The way we did it, Monica had this idea of like, let's test out all the job titles. Let's test out the things like software analyst, data engineer, data, analyst, all research scientist, all these things. And the one that people responded to the most when we were testing these job titles out on LinkedIn was data scientist. And so we decided to label ourselves data scientists for that reason. Why has it taken off? I think that's the real thing. Is the reason data scientist as a category has taken off is that what we've seen is this moment where we can bring our skills using math, physics, all engineering, statistics, economics together with these broad data sets allows us to do something, not only building products, but to deliver policy, better solutions for everybody through the lens of data. We are building with data now. We are actually delivering ideas and solutions via the power of data. We're not just creating a report or an assessment.
Got it. I want to talk about two things next. Is the first part of your journey is growing up, thinking about these different use cases, and also building incredible teams around it. But you also talk about changing the context of how data is used in an organization. I want to touch about the first part next, but within your government experience, you've worked in COVID, you've worked in defense. How have you applied this lesson that you've learned in LinkedIn in terms of data changing the context of how an organization thinks, builds products, and really becomes a core asset instead of just a reporting feature of how an organization functions? So how does that lesson that you learn in LinkedIn apply to government agencies or the companies that support them on an everyday basis?
Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, the ideas that I learned in the Department of Defense the first time around after 9/11, and trying to think about how do you actually use data in service of the operational mission, is what informed me how to think about it in industry. Yeah. It's actually government that helped me see over the horizon for what industry needs versus the other way around. What industry allowed me to do was build a lot of the tooling and so much the scaffolding. It's important to realize also, this isn't just me. It's very important in my mindset that data science is a team sport. Whether it's Jonathan Goldman, who deserves really the credit for building people you may know, Monica Ragati, who built Jobs You Might Like, Chris Rickamini, Neha Narkade, Jay Krebs, Jen Rao, who came up with the ideas for Kafka, which is the primary technology for moving data around, and Russell Belkin for so much of his work, and there's like all these people that came together to do these things. And so one of the first things that we've seen in this case, whether it's COVID or any of these other things, is you have to make it a team sport. You've got to have a team on this. And so when COVID was taking place and a number of us kind of jumped in and volunteered, what we found very early on was we needed to put a team that was brainstorming together. Dan, one of our good friends, Kit Rodolfa, who's just an amazing person, kind of came in early on and was working with the California Department of Public Health. And we said, what data do we have? What data don't we have? Can we even produce a graph? What do we know? What do we don't know? What would we like to know? And that helped us kind of start to level set around all the different ideas. People were talking about dashboards. And what we tried to start saying is, could we even produce a dashboard? Right. Could we produce it more consistently? Could we do it day over day? Could we do it more often? Could we build a model? And what would it take to build a model? Could we build insights? And so we started to actually break this into a few areas. One was, how do we get lots of data fast, timely, accurately, and efficiently? So it wouldn't take a lot of people a ton of time of cleaning and all those things. And each of those things was a huge amount of work between, and what we realized is we needed both people who were inside the state government, the local governments also, city, county governments, but also a lot of volunteers to help support it. We brought all that data and started pulling it into generalized databases. And lo and behold, as we started to do this, what did we realize? We didn't have some of the basics. Like, what does the basic mean? A data dictionary. There wasn't a data dictionary. And so people were putting data into the database, but no one was actually getting the value out of the database. And so we literally just created one on Excel spreadsheets to kind of create something. We didn't use anything whiz bang. We just needed something there because we needed to actually help people do it. And then what we did is we literally just brought people together and we just have brainstorming sessions and share. It was like show and tell. What did you learn today? What did you learn today? And then we'd start, what we realized is people would start gravitating to certain things. And then there's this other part that was critical. Because a number of us were close to the decision makers, we were able to bring back context. And as we were able to bring back context, the teams started to move faster. And then we were able to take those ideas and take them back up to the people in the leadership positions and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. And we're able to track more effectively. Now, there's another part of this that became really, really important, especially in that state level, which is how do we develop increased trust in the data? And one of the things that was produced, and Cara DeFrias really led this effort, is we started to put this deck together every night that became our insights deck. And this is just a deck of things that we were seeing that were interesting out of the data. Curiosities, interesting ideas. This is led by Mike Wilkening, Cara, Raja Magulis, and a whole bunch of other amazing people. And they started to just show these kind of tidbits that they saw. And this deck started to become the most read thing every night. We also deployed a survey on the website.
What were some of the things? I mean, you know, we were working in COVID. A bunch of other people on this call were learning about COVID. And there was always this tension between new insights, but also kind of like operational needs over time. What's the mortality rate? How can we predict it? And that tension always exists. Facilitate my process, but give me stuff that's interesting on the way. But shit, it's distracting. There's stuff to do. So how did you kind of manage that tension? And what were some of the insights that you were delivering around this important problem that a lot of people on this call were struggling with?
Mm-hmm. So that first bucket of the day-to-day operational, make sure we know how things are going. Like you said, the mortality, the testing rates, all those things. That's a lane. Yeah. Like that was a lane of just like operationally get better, more accurate, efficient, make it easier, make it more robust. Every single day, we were just trying to get a little bit more efficient at that. And, you know, we would try to go for lightweight solutions. And then like many of us, I think we'd start to backfill with better and more sophisticated things. Yeah. The lane of insights was how do we start to explore to get us over the horizon? We're not managing today, but knowing that we have an asymmetric actor, a virus that's going to mutate. And so what do we think over the horizon? So some of these insights were, example, using Foursquare and SafeGraph and other people's data to understand, well, where are people going? Are people going to beaches, parks? What is that? How do we deploy resources? Some of it was trying to, take an insight that we had seen from models and being like, wow, if we ran the models this way, we might see something different. Or sort of highlighting research that was done by, another team. It wasn't done by our team, but somebody totally else. And we'd be like, here's an interesting factoid that we found. And so they were a lightweight snippets kind of things around those data that would then provoke people to start asking, maybe we should promote this into our daily operations. So it's a little bit like speculative, interesting ideas that help people kind of explore what's there. And some of the interesting things that was there was also, it gave us space for our quantitative or qualitative results from surveys, which were not necessarily scientific, but they allowed us to ground the data with humanity. And that was really, really important for us to be able to know, like, here's how people are thinking about, like, we may have data from Foursquare, et cetera, about here's people are going a lot to beaches, but here's the qualitative of why people are going to the beaches and how they feel about beach closures. And this doesn't need to be a one size fits all type of thing. Does that help?
It does. Yeah. And I think this is something that we hear a lot from not small teams. Small teams are kind of like married to, for better or worse, a lot of the kind of like first order operational workflow dedication. But as you get bigger, that you can think about whether or not you can expand your team from, first order operational challenges to this kind of additional lane of insights. Which leads me to another question is how...
Can I just dovetail on that? Because this is really important. Yeah. So when we got to California and we were doing this, there's so many amazing people inside, different parts of the government who are trying to work on this. One of the things that we did was try to just help define what are our lanes. Yeah. We just try to give a little bit of clarity, like, okay, your team dashboard, your team modeling, your team insights, and try to get people a little bit of better ownership. And like, what do I mean by that? So literally we brought everyone to, like, we had this great meeting around, from the California Department of Health. And we just said, who's here and explain what you do? And we just kind of had and we're like, oh my gosh, you know this? Like, it was like LinkedIn in real life. And right. it was like, oh, you can do these things. You should be on this team. And then these teams, what they did is every day they kind of produced snippets or reports up, and then everyone got to see it. And then we were just trying to provide better transparency across these things. It's no different than during the Obama administration, when I think it was every Tuesday at noon or Wednesday at noon, the whole entire open data community had the ability to convene on a call or in person to do show and tell of what they were doing with federal data. And then so one agency could say, oh, you did that? We could do that too. Why not do that? Those things may seem stupid and oftentimes feel like, oh, one more thing. But I got to tell you, every time you do it, one, it's like it just gets you out of the day-to-day, but also gives you freedom to collaborate. And we were attempting to break down the silos so everyone could be more effective.
Yeah. A lot of the folks that we work with in our own experience, when you work with government organizations, you meet with people who are highly principled, highly dedicated, but also, how do I put it, crushing bureaucracies. And it's kind of like this weird thing. People who are so dedicated to the mission, but also you have regulations, et cetera. And frankly, a lot of those regulations and structures are really important because from a point of view of security, scale, you just have to do this. People forget how big governments are. Governments are way bigger in many ways than private sector organizations. So you've worked in a lot of these contexts of big, messy agencies. How did you get shit done?
Honestly, the answer to how we got stuff done is by empowering people. Mike Wilkening told me something really important when we were doing the California COVID response. He said, we just need to make sure that we're not pushing, we should leverage the powers of bureaucracy. When you push against bureaucracy and you're cutting against the grain, you're preventing the system from doing what it's designed to do. And so how do you jujitsu something that is novel and new and allow the bureaucracy to use it? And so what does that mean? At the federal level, it was having the president sign an executive order that says, by default, all data is open and machine readable. And then everyone says, oh, okay, we have permission. Now the bureaucracy says, we're supposed to do this. Part of the challenge, and my challenge, was to say, hey, this is an unfunded mandate.
Right.
How do we help people deal with an unfunded mandate? how do we show value to Congress so that it gets appropriated?
Right.
At the state level, one of the things that I found, which was most critical for these bureaucracies, and I'm not using bureaucracy pejoratively because I think there is good reason for bureaucracy. It was to actually to give people headroom and an excuse or permission to do something. And then when people realize like, oh, I have air cover, honestly, the novel stuff starts to happen. And people don't feel like they want to do the right thing. As you said, people are so well principled. The systems are designed to do that. What we have to do is make it easier for them to do so. And what I am trying to do is, and the way I start my day is trying to go around the federal bureaucracy or the different, whatever bureaucracy it is, and ask what sucks. And then asking, what can we do to make it suck less?
Right.
And if that requires a governor to sign off on something, if it's the legislature, how do we storytell to help people see the value? I'll be very specific on this. As we were going through this in the California level, one of the things that kind of kept coming up was, people kept classically saying, we don't have permission to release that data. And we kept saying, you do. You actually do. And so what we actually needed to do is we went to the governor, and Governor Newsom, we said, people don't realize that they should be doing this. And, and he was just like, how can they not realize this? I said,
and why didn't they realize it?
Because I think it was bureaucracy has a certain momentum.
Yeah.
And what was needed was basically the governor yelling from his perch, thou shalt open up the data. Like, unless there's a problem, raise your hand if you have a concern, but otherwise open up the data because we don't have time. We have issues. Let's make sure we're doing the safeguard checks of privacy and all these things. And it's not a but, it's an and. We need to get this out there because we don't have time. There's too much risk. And once that happened, people said, oh, I can do that. Sure, why not? And then what the other one that was, and this is like one of the most important ones, I think, is we forget to storytell. And sometimes we feel bad because it's like storytelling feels like we're spinning or doing something. The three things that we teach every data scientist in our work, and what I found most successful is the classics of storytelling. What do you want the person to take away from this? What's a literal thing you want them to take away? 2 is what action do you want them to take? Like, do you want them to tweet about it? Do you want them to call a meeting? Do you want them to pick up the phone? Like, what do you want them to do about it? And then 3rd is, how do we want them to feel? Should they be inspired? Should they be excited? Should they be fearful, scared, paranoid? Like, how do we want them to be? And that may feel against the grain as a data person. But if we're going through all this work, we actually have a desire of what we're trying to communicate. And so if the line on COVID is getting really bad, well, why would we use a blue line? That should maybe be a red line with a dark dot shadow, these other things. You need to think about design traits and design skills as we do these things, because that is how we then effectively galvanize people. And then the final one of this, which I think is we often leave out, is we need to ensure that the right people are at the table. And one of the things that was a challenge is we just didn't have the right people at the right time at the right tables. And so part of our job was to help people realize, like, you actually need this person here. And it'd be like, yeah, this meeting doesn't, involve them. It'd be like, well, you're using all their stuff. You may not be using it the right way, or you may not have context or caveats.
Yeah.
And so that portion is the other way. Sorry, I know I'm going a long time here, but let me belabor one thing. It's building superpowers. So what we realized as we were talking, and I can't emphasize this enough, we were talking all the time to local public health department officials. And we realized how much stress and pressure they were under. And we said, you know what? We are failing at the state level in supporting them with the right data to help them justify to their local constituents and city council about the decisions they are taking.
Yep.
So we needed to build a tool for them. And so we said, what would that tool look like? And so we built a tool called CalCat, CALCAT, and we open sourced it as well. to allow anybody to take and build on the top of this platform to easily serve up data in a useful way. And what did we find? People were cut and paste, like literally screenshotting, blowing these things up and taking them to city council. And we're like, oh, wow, well, we could just export it for you so that you can just print it straight up. Like, you don't need to do that. And we made this very iterative process, but we were like, how can we make your life easier? What's missing in this for you? What could we do better? And that process then allowed everyone to build trust, and it gave us momentum that then the bureaucracy could leverage in its own way, and then it allowed it to make the problem easier for everybody.
Okay. You might have covered this whole point in full, but a lot of the subtle part of the role for data teams is earning trust. And you talked about earning trust within the government, and that a lot of that is about being a service partner, but then with the public. There's misinformation, there's skepticism, there's a set of two parties, there's lying. But the interest of the government is to support everybody. Every resident, every citizen is equal. Doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, et cetera. What have you learned in terms of the covered and support and trust internally, but what are some best practices beyond what you talked about to help build trust with the government and their relationship with voters, citizens, residents, et cetera? What can people do? This is an increasing civic demand. It's been really tough. What can people do?
Yeah, this has been a massive issue for us. And I think there's a few lessons there. The best advice I got in my career was not about data, but just generally how we think about ourselves, which is trust is consistency over time.
Yeah.
And trust is consistency over time. And if you're not consistent, you can't be trusted. And the thing that often happens with data is we're not consistent with data. Like, you know, we produce the data, it doesn't happen regularly enough, or then when something breaks and people don't understand or appreciate why it breaks. And so it looks and sometimes feels like we may think we're being consistent, but to our partners, we're not consistent, or we're leaving them with the feeling that we're not consistent.
Yeah.
And that we have to ask, how do we improve that? And so one of the things I focus on is we never, ever miss a deadline. If we make a commitment, we will deliver it. We will solve your problems. We take your hardest problems, we will solve it, and we find solutions. And many times that solution may not have the direct data solution. It may require other techniques that of storytelling or other things that help people understand why we can't just have an easy solution of like, when will COVID end? You know, or like the things that we were like, I just want a date. And you're like, it doesn't work that way. Right. But also the other part of this is never talking down to somebody. It's never making somebody feel inferior. It's very easy to weaponize data. And something that I absolutely insist on is that we use data to lift up our partners. We help elucidate problems, but we never, ever weaponize data against another team or partner, because it's too easy, but then you will never get that trust. And then the other part, I think, is there in the lesson that we've seen with climate change and so many other things. Throwing more data at a problem or a person or a group doesn't convince them. Like, we've just seen that. And we're seeing it around vaccine hesitancy. We're seeing it around misinformation. We're just like, but the data is obvious. Like, the worst thing you can say is, you know, you show a graph and you're just like, as you can see here.
Right.
And then you're like, no one sees what you're talking about. Right. As the graph shows, I'm like, that means nothing.
Right.
We have to do a better job storytelling and using the data to connect to real people's lives and help them see it. This is the reason we say the data points have names. Bring those names up. Show those stories that are associated with each person in the bar graph or the line chart or whatever it is. Hopefully not a pie graph. But you know, all those things is what grounds it. Because then when you do that, you can't be discounted. People can't just be like, oh, the data's flawed. You're like, here's the people in that data that this data represents.
Right. Was that, did you use that tactic in California around COVID for some of the people that were difficult to convince given their own thoughts, perceptions?
All the time, like all the time, especially around contentious issues, like where people didn't fully appreciate the long tail or could understand some of these things. And also the data gaps. So for example, one of the ones that was not talked about early on around, remember everyone was talking about Google, Apple notifications?
Yeah.
And they're saying, hey, this will just solve the problem. And a number of us were like, well, what's that going to do for minority communities? We have a large migrant worker population here in California that are essential workers. They're the reason the country has food. And people were like, it'll work for them. We're like, we're not giving them recourse as a pathway to even, like we say, oh, you've been notified. Well, they can't. There's no place they can go to quarantine. Like we're not giving them good care. So we had to help people see, like, these people are not captured in the data. So everyone was like, oh, it'll work here. So going and talking to them, getting introduced to some of them, learning from them, talking to those, the groups that represent those people, and then kind of saying, like, we don't see them in the data sets.
Yeah.
That's what then helped people kind of go, yeah, this thing isn't baked enough to actually work. And it's also one of the reasons the exposure notifications never work sufficiently.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a slight extension of this, that there's kind of like among the general civic community, there's a little, I don't want to say it's hopelessness or despair, but we are at an inflection point in our government today. And it's a little bit scary. But there's hopefulness among people who work in data that see, wow, there's this new problem-solving capacity. There's this kind of like pessimism, but there's optimism in how can we use data so proactively to solve a lot of these civic problems, and we can use it right now. COVID has like kind of put the brakes on that a little bit in terms of what are some of these longer term opportunities. But I'm interested in your history is looking beyond COVID under these conditions of hopefulness that I think we all share. What's next? 2, 3, 4, 5 years? What are the problems that the folks on this call should be thinking about where data can play a critical role, but maybe we're not thinking about right now because we've been so intensely involved with COVID for the past 2 years?
Mm-hmm. The number one I still come back to is, and we still have so much opportunity ahead, is just on basic opening of data.
Yeah.
And how much opportunity that potentially unleashes, both in terms of transparency, discovering where we have inequities, and also just helping us see what we should build and what we should work on. I think to the police data initiative, which opened up, was helping police departments open up so much data to increase transparency, or the police data initiative that was allowing data to be responsibly and shared with privacy and controls between healthcare and law enforcement to ensure that people who have mental health issues aren't being taken to jail, but to the right care facility. There is so much opportunity for efficiency. One of the reasons I think data science has grown so much effectively is because increasing fields are intersecting with each other.
Oh.
And it's the intersection of fields that do really well. Why is data science so powerful at the college level? Because people are sitting there going, well, what if I'm one part physicist, one part data person, or economics in this? And you see this right now. Economists are taking machine learning AI classes. You see physicists doing it. It's much like, 20 years ago, we started to have biophysicists. And look what that's unlocked. Unbelievable things. Or bioinformatics, cell molecular bio meets statistics and unlocking the human genome. Data science kind of broadens that and says, here's a horizontal. And if you think about a university, here's the math department, physics, economics, bio, et cetera, all these different departments, but there's nothing that cuts across them.
Yeah.
And data science is that thing. And so when I look across, the future, and I think about the idea of tailored genomic treatments, precision medicine, these ideas, that's the intersection of data, healthcare, health policy, all these things. COVID is fundamentally showing us that this is a multidisciplinary thing. You need economics, because you can't just say, do we shut down or not shut down? You have to ask public health questions. Public health is the intersection of so much data, the modeling, all these things that are needed. And so I remain actually very optimistic. I remain incredibly bullish. What I see from what the conversations I have is data is very bipartisan. People forget that under President Trump, we saw the opening of hospital data for transparency. Now, hospitals still are not complying the way they should, but we're seeing so much more transparency of like, wait, why is an MRI at this hospital cost so much different from this place? What should we do about that? How should we think about that? We're seeing organizations like ProPublica use data in novel ways to do incredible investigative journalism that helps us go fix problems. And then we're also seeing like these, we have vaccines because of a 10-year, decade investment in science that has largely been led also by novel techniques and data. Mm-hmm. And so those combined things make me so bullish in the efficiencies and the ease that we can actually provide good solutions to our constituents. It makes me very, very hopeful. And I'm not talking like just machine learning and AI, everything. I'm talking about boring, stupid problems that you're just like, if a little bit of data was added here, man, this would work so much better. And how much more awesome would it be just to have these things? Yeah.
A big item that some of the folks in this call are thinking about is criminal justice. And it's such a hard effort, because in a lot of cities you have a desire to become more progressive, if that's the right word, on criminal justice, especially as people look at how the system is architected towards institutional racism. But at the same time, we need police for law enforcement. We need them. And a lot of police officers right now feel pretty shitty about themselves. Resignations are out of control, which makes it even harder to continue to have effective criminal justice in any area. You've spent a lot of time thinking about this. What are some of the key things that you've learned, and do you have any use cases that might be important for any of the folks who are working in large cities or even medium-sized cities and state governments that are thinking how they can improve law enforcement and build a better relationship between law enforcement groups and administrators of cities that all want the same thing, but the relationship right now is so tenuous?
Mm-hmm. This is a really tough one. And it's tough for so many different reasons that we've seen, given the horrific murder of so many people of color. Yeah. From George Floyd to, you just go down the list.
Taylor,
everybody. That's one side of it. We've also seen how dangerous policing is. Being a police officer is a horror. It is unbelievably scary if you're a family member of an officer or someone in law enforcement. We've seen officers who put their lives on the line all the time and are harmed and hurt. And one of the things that I found, which was really important, is to try to make sure that we're in the weeds, really trying to understand what it's like to live in walk in each other's shoes. And I've met so many amazing police officers, and I've met also departments where they have real issues. And so the first thing I think which we need to address is transparency of data.
Yeah.
And what we've seen is incredible opposition by very basic things that are easy. Like, why can't we show data on certain things like officer-involved shootings? We still don't have a real database outside the Washington Post, really. There's a few others of officer-involved shootings. How do we make sure, what about just firearm discharges? What about basic stuff that you would expect in a company. It's unbelievable that we have this. But there's other things that we've seen where we also need to ask, like, how do we actually better appropriately measure so what gets measured gets fixed? We've seen this also with like Baltimore Police Department that went under consent decree. When you looked at the data, it was just like, oh my gosh, this is obvious that we have issues. And then the police, unfortunately, very sadly, the police union has fought that kind of data. We've also seen, what's the leading killer of police officers right now? COVID. It's not shootings. It's not traffic accidents. It's COVID. What could we do to improve that? Those ideas. The one that I think that I see also there is that if we are able to use data, and I've seen this, like, I'll give you a concrete example, is we saw when we brought a number of police departments together, officers, chiefs, activists, data scientists, technologists, they had one of them produce this graph of their city department, and they showed this line of stop rates by race. And it was kind of like, here's the stop rates by black, white, other. And it was like, other, you could do better than other. And they're just like, well, yeah, we don't actually characterize that. But the interesting thing is the stop rates were about 50-50. It was pretty well balanced. And then you pull up the next graph, which is search rates. And it's like black search rates, white search rates. And you kind of do the back calculation. And you're like, oh my gosh, this basically means every 4 times you drive to go get groceries, you're getting pulled over. Like when you put it into that sort of connection, you're just like, who feels okay in their society that 1 every 4 trips to the supermarket, you're going to get pulled over? And especially if you're one category and you're like, why is there distrust of the law enforcement in that community? So then the question starts to come in, can we effectively double click on that? What's behind that? Is it a few officers? Is it, the officers because they're in a certain area? What is it? And as you dig into it, you realize it's just a few officers contributing to this one,
right?
In this case. And so the police chief in that situation is like, can you tell me who those officers are? And you're like, why don't you know?
Right.
And it's because that data wasn't easily accessible to them. They didn't have that version of an operational dashboard. They don't have their team of data scientists to help them go through these things. They don't have a team that's finding insights that help them do better, including the officers who are doing a really spectacular job doing these things. And if we could empower those in those kind of activities, I do remain optimistic that we can really improve both the dialogue and effectively improve community policing to lower crime, decrease recidivism, or increase recidivism, decrease recidivism, and just allow a better engagement with officers and the public.
Was that police, when you got him the names, was he responsive?
Very.
Did he default to, I'll do something about it? Or did he default to, I got to protect my guys? I got to tell you, most of the times when I've engaged with this, the chiefs have been very open. The challenge, honestly, and unfortunately in many cases, has been the union. And the unions have pushed back on it and saying there's rights and things. And now I will say also, the unions sometimes don't have effective data because they are looking out for their officers. And if you were able to provide them with data so they knew how to actually leverage their collective power, they might be able to improve better outcomes for their members. Yeah.
But this is unfortunately has kind of come down to contractual things in many times and just sort of being a direct sort of no data is good data approach, unfortunately. And I don't think this gets a little bit as everyone's fearful that data is going to be used to weaponize it against their community, rather than, and the best thing that we could have is using data in this case to foster discussion and allow to decide what potential good outcomes might be. Yeah.
A growing theme in governments right now, 50 years too late, 100 years too late, is equity. And a lot of that right now is as simple as defining equity. Before we do something about it, what does equity mean in the context of a city or a state? Right now, a lot of our customers are, at the city level. I'm interested in your work so far. How have you thought about equity? Where are some of the places where it's been kind of really out of whack? And have you seen any level of government thinking about effective interventions to improve equity at any level?
Mm-hmm. The first thing that sort of jumps to mind is, I think it's a lot of places are saying this is team equity.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't think that's a good solution. Equity is everyone's problem. And so now there could be a core team that's a little bit more like, just like you see data. It's going to be like, this is the data science team and no one else gets the data scientists. Right. You kind of want this to be a vertical and a horizontal. We need both. And so the equity teams and the people who are working on this need to be infused everywhere. Now, what could we do to do that and improve it? Honestly, some of it starts with, in this case for equity, I think, is what data don't we have?
Right.
And then ask, what would it take to actually go get that data and put those building blocks in place so that we can better assess these things. Too many of the things that I get asked around equity, or I see about, we can't answer the question because there's a refusal to track. I think one of the ones for me, and that we've seen play out over the last decade, has been basic issues of equity in the military. For example, sexual assaults and making sure people are protected, both men and women, on sexual assaults, but also the proof that women can serve in combat. Transgender people do not lower military readiness. Like these kind of data have never been and continue not to be most collected in the most efficient way. We've seen in cases around mortality and other medical issues, generalized medical issues, outcomes, Black mothers we're starting to realize that it's the chance of death for a Black mother is far higher than a white mother. Overall, chances for death of a mother in the United States is far greater than other parts of the world. How do we open up that data or collect it even to be able to get a sense of how bad that is? People have had to jump through incredible hoops to try to even get singular data points around this. So seeing those type things. And then part of it, I think also, is we need to be very careful about why, like talking to the community about why we're collecting the data. Too often we're just like, give us the data.
Yeah,
and we don't go in there helping people understand what we're trying to solve and what safeguards are there. Data needs to be collected with the community as the lead partner, not as a subservient partner, the lead partner. And that's the only way you start to move these things forward to showcase it. And then I think part of the other thing which we need, and the way I tell people this is not only that, as I mentioned earlier, the data points have names, we need to bring up those names, but on your team, you have to have people of the community. And they may not have the data skills or all those things, but they have to be an active participant as you're discussing the things, because they will unlock insights that you don't see, you don't get. And also they're going to just make sure that you're doing it right.
Got it. So the next category of equity that we're seeing, well, there's a bunch of categories. There's the digital divide. There's correlating distribution of infrastructure investments relative to taxation. There is education, though that's related. And then finally, there's public health.
Food deserts. Like we could go on and on and on. Diesel fumes, pollution, lead, water. I mean, there's a Maslow's hierarchy here.
Yes,
all the things.
Are there any cases that you've seen where somebody is attacking this and doing well, maybe not setting a standard, but at least showing some cases where it's been a problem identified, it's been able to architect it around data with some type of mathematical interpretation in some way, and is making progress against it?
I think the place where, I mean, if people have seen it, I would love to see it.
Okay, all right.
The thing that I see that's perhaps the most impressive right now, honestly, is the investigative journalists.
Yeah.
Who are showing like what the potential impact, and academia also, of showing the potential impact of climate change. that is disproportionate on the groups without that have been disenfranchised. Those on the talking about medical issues, showing those things, the maps around food deserts, these type things. To me, that storytelling is what allows us to not only get angry, and we should get angry, and that's what also the form of protest is for, but also to galvanize legislative action. Legislative action is what's going to move the day. And then the other part of this is that we still have to take fundamental action. Like, let's just be very frank, we still don't have equal pay for equal work with men and women. We still don't have that. We still have a world where many groups still believe the HPV vaccine for girls will promote some form of promiscuity.
Right.
And despite saving them in the future from cervical cancer.
Yep.
And so those things, we need to reach out to those groups, especially those that are in minority groups that may have even more, the burden on them is even higher. Yep.
Got it. So we only have a few minutes left. I want to talk about moonshots. Mm-hmm. COVID was a moonshot. We've talked about the cancer moonshot, which is actually a thing. A lot of these folks on the call are in the federal government. What are some of the interesting moonshots that the United States should be focused on that maybe we're not thinking about right now, but data's playing a critical role and can really change our future 10 years out? Mm-hmm. What should we think of? I mean, the United States government is one of the only institutions, apart from the Chinese government, that has such leverage over basic things. Mapping the genome, sending a bunch of dudes to the moon, et cetera. So, but right. What are some of the moonshots that we should be thinking about on the federal level that can really help kind of like cause the change that we need, or at least cause some type of incremental improvement that are kind of bubbling where we have a lot of opportunity?
Mm-hmm. So what I do is I look backwards from taking things like the idea of having truly personalized medicine, a reality, like or solving the cure for cancer, and then going backwards and saying, what does it take to unlock that? And so one of the ones that I think there is fundamentally allowing anyone who wants to be a data scientist to be a data scientist. And what would it look like to really enable our educational program to foster that, and with equity, diversity, inclusion, all of the things that are essential to making sure this works well. Part of that, I think, is that every computer scientist, every data scientist needs to be trained in ethics and security, not just as like a separate class, but as core to the curriculum. I would love there to be better liberal arts training into the curriculum of data scientists and technologists, and just a better understanding of what the world is like. Some of the other kind of things that are a little bit more moonshot-ish are, it's still really hard to work with data. It's really hard. Like, we've gotten a lot of good infrastructure and tools and other things. It's hard to deploy that technology. It's still really hard to clean data. It's hard to find data. It's hard when, even if you open up data, what's the notion of developer relations for data scientists? Where if you open it up and somebody says, hey, I found a flaw, how do you kind of go backwards? How do we address issues around provenance of data? We don't still have our GitLab kind of a model for data for us to build off of each other. Yep. And I think we have really big upcoming issues of ensuring that as we get to the moonshot kind of time horizon, what does it look like to ensure that artificial intelligence, machine learning are done with not only an eye towards the values that we hold dear in our societies, but also really preserve the rights of others. And I think we're, in that 30-year arc, we do need to start thinking about the questions of what does AI regulation look like as we get to closer and closer to other forms of generalized AI. And fundamentally what this comes down to is a statement from President Obama, which is, how do we ensure technology works for us rather than against us?
Yeah. Okay. All right, DJ, we only got 1 minute left, but thank you so much. Any parting words for these amazing civic professionals on this call?
Yeah, I'll end with where we started, and something, Dan, I know you are very passionate about also. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing this. Is just a message of gratitude to all the people all of you out there. I mean, you don't have to do this. Data scientists is one of the top places you can get employed anywhere. And thanks to you all are moving the needle. You may not always feel it. You may not always see it. But one of the things I think we've seen with these efforts is if you look over a decade, wow, it moves the needle massively. Yep. And so I'm just grateful that you all are on the team data, if you will, and are doing this. And because you are making a difference, you are fundamentally changing the game, empowering people, and charting a pathway for better society. And I do not say that lightly, and it may seem like I'm just being sort of making a high-fluting remark, but I've seen it. I've seen that. I've had this unbelievable, fortunate ability to see how the needle is moving. And I remain so incredibly optimistic because people like all of you are out there doing these things.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, DJ, thank you so much. And thank you for everybody on the call. And we'll get going on our next session. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.